I'm really pleased to have Anne and Peter here today to talk to us about their experiences and their solutions. So let me just give you a quick bio on AnneMcIlroy. She is principal of Brook McIlroy and has over 25 years of experience as an urban designer and a project manager on a number of different master plans and urban projects in Canada and the United States. Anne has particular expertise in public consultation and the development of design standards and guidelines for a variety of community, waterfront, university, and institutional projects. And Anne and I have worked on, as recently as last year, on developing York Region's context-sensitive solutions guidelines, which we had great success in developing. Anne is the founding chair of the Urban Design Working Group, a committee of the Ontario Provincial Planning Institute, which is of urban designers. And she is the inaugural member of the Toronto Waterfront Design Review Panel and a member of the Advisory Committee on Planning, Design, Realty for the National Capital Commission. I didn't know that. So Anne is going to be speaking to us first. So let's start and welcome Anne McIlroy.
Thank you very much, Angela. It's great to come and talk about a favorite subject of ours. And in fact, we honestly think that mid-sized cities are having some of the greatest success in developing complete streets in their communities right now. And our practice has had the pleasure of working in quite a few of these mid-sized cities throughout the GTA, in and around Toronto in the last few years. Some of these include Guelph, Oakville, Waterloo, the region, as Angela mentioned, York region, and the cities within it, Kingston as well. And quite honestly, I think that a lot of these streets exhibit the best precedents for change. And it might be because the mid-sized city provides the opportunity for smaller communities to come together and develop decision-making practices that can happen more quickly and flexibly. In the size of the city, that means that consultation programs can happen more quickly and sometimes more easily, and that we can really kind of develop processes that happen in an effective and timely way. Today I would just like to address some of the issues of mid-size complete street design in terms of the challenges but also the opportunities that happen in mid-size cities. The first is managing mindsets, all the individuals that come together to provide influence on street design and change, whether it be the municipality, the region, the local businesses, the local area residences. Secondly, the importance of a creative process and a productive process that goes together in a way where we can actually think strategically, but also creatively about how we design streets. And balancing the various interests of not only the individuals as we design streets, but also the elements within the street itself. Not everything fits in mid-sized cities. We're often working with street rights-of-ways that are quite tight, based on the original fabric of the city. So we have to actually develop a decision-making process that we did with the York region, where we can decide what fits in the boulevard, what is necessary, what fits in the roadway, what is necessary, what would be nice to have, and what would be and what is essential to have. And then finally, I'd just like to touch on some of the aspects of creating place-specific design. Each street and community is different, brings together a different set of priorities and principles that are not just based on the local, but based on the city-wide issues as a whole, trying to create that connectivity within the city and the region that it exists in. And building for generations. We need to think more like the Egyptians who build for the generations to come in the kind of quality materials that we select in our cities. So the challenge overall is really thinking about transforming mid-sized cities and how can intelligent street design support contemporary urban life. That urban life that is changing as we go in terms of how we move around, who in this audience came today on a bicycle, who came by transit, who came by car, who walked. We're coming in a whole mode of different ways. And in mid-sized cities, we have actually a greater opportunity sometimes than in bigger cities where we're traveling greater distance to have a greater diversity of that mode share between cycling, walking, and taking transit. So the mid-sized city, as I mentioned, offers tremendous opportunities and challenges. Often the mid-sized city, when we think of Oakville or Guelph, or even European cities, they often have originally located themselves on or close to water, a river, or the lake. In the case of Oakville, it's placed close to Lake Ontario. In the case of Guelph, it's close to the Grand River. And the topographical features and the way that city or town grew has much to do with the original fabric of that locale. So we need to keep that in mind. How did the place grow? What is it near? How does that actually influence the orientation of streets, the hierarchy of streets, and what they knit into in terms of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to them? And they also have a cultural influence in terms of how they've grown, who lives there and why they live there, and what is the influence of business there, neighborhood, and all the social aspects that come out of that. And so many of the mid-sized streets, such as Oakville and Guelph and Kingston, the neighborhoods are intricately connected with the main streets, and their tight-knit grid of streets and blocks make it often very easy to move from one street, which might be a local street, to a high street, which is effectively the main streets. So the social interaction that happens on these main streets and these high streets is really key. And so when we're designing streets, we're thinking about the contemporary nature of social interaction, how it happens on a daily basis, that the street itself is not just about coming there and getting in and through it, but actually spending time there and having the fabric to do that comfortably and well in. And much of that has to do with how we anticipate the boulevard design. So managing mindsets is really key when we think about streets. One of the key challenges, and I hope there are not too many engineers in the room, but municipal engineers that we work with often have been working in those municipalities for a long time and have a set of standards and their guides that they work with that direct the width of lanes, the width of the street, the overall width of the right-of-way. And because their concerns are very much to do with operational safety and connectivity, they carry that responsibility bag, which we need to take seriously as designers. We also have a responsibility to local residents who live on or adjacent to these streets in terms of their sunlight, view, and their privacy. They live there for a reason, and they want to live there comfortably and happily in the way they may have moved in at a certain given time. Business owners are key that we consult with in designing streets. They may be business owners on the main street that is going to be torn up and disrupted over, in the case of Oakville, will be a 2-year period of time. So when we're working with the business owners, we're doing individual sessions with them to talk very much about what it means to work on that street when the street is being torn up and reconstructed. What can we do to mitigate that effect? The region and municipality, who contain the departments that oversee the work, planning and urban design, engineering, parks, and maintenance, they need to be involved because they're going to be doing the work, paying for the work largely, and ensuring that the long-term maintenance and reliability of the street is maintained. When we begin with a street design concept, it's not hard to make it look good. But there are a lot of considerations that we need to go through as we go through the design of the street. So we need to consider all the impacts. What are the impacts on parking? And forgive me if I begin with that, but unfortunately that's the first thing that people talk about is the loss of parking on the street. Because realistically, it does affect people who come to the street to shop, business owners who have people come and use their store, people with mobility issues, deliveries, people who are bringing goods to the street. So parking, service, and loading is a big aspect of the street. In the case of Lakeshore Road in Oakville, we started with existing parking spaces of 129 on the street, and they were being reduced to 55. So we need to consider parking on the street. What's the impact on transit? If we design a beautiful new street, can buses actually get by? For Oakville and a number of other streets, we're looking at a flexible curbless street that will allow people to get across the street without negotiating a curb or changing grade. But what does that mean to a transit vehicle who are picking up and dropping off people on that curbless street? How does that work with the transit deck? Where do the left turn lanes go? Or can they be restricted? Can they be added in a way that doesn't increase the width of the street? And what kind of lane widths can we do on streets that are minimal, still create that fine-grained, tight aspect of the street, but don't limit safety and ability for vehicles to pass one another or park safely? What's the impact on the boulevard? Can we create a wide boulevard where we can have a street that acts much like this, which feels more like almost like a Dutch street, a Woonerf that has a pedestrian priority, but still allows for vehicles to pass on it? Does the asymmetrical configuration, as is indicated in this image, create advantages, for example, on the north side of the street where there might be patios and greater access to sunlight in the day? What is the impact on our operations? If we do have bike lanes on the street, is the bike lane flush with the street service? Is there minimal impact on operations in terms of clearing snow and getting that away? Is it simple? And what happens with the street sweeper as it comes by? Bike lanes are key, and that's one of the greatest things that we've been talking about in our street design, and trying to integrate these wherever we can and where they work best. They're often phased. We make sure that they're wide enough, that there's a buffered lane to be installed when the remaining segment is fully reconstructed, and that there's a public education program for bike boxes and what they mean on the street. I mentioned the creative process, and that's very key to creating an orderly system of developing the priorities in the street. So like the Seattle Sculpture Park that came to integrate a whole series of streets and its waterfront, it was a Gardner-like expression through the ramping configuration of a single entity. We need to think of streets as being a big idea that we can sketch and understand as a whole, begin to look at in creative fashion, sometimes just through hand drawings, where the elements of the street, can we get that down quickly? We talk to one another in all the jurisdictions that are involved. That we meet with the public and the business owners and all the key stakeholders. In this situation, we developed a game sort of plan exercise where we created a master plan for the street, where people actually played with scale pieces of the street that would allow them to design a street themselves. And then with Angela through York Region and the region of Waterloo, we developed a decision-making process that took us through what are the existing elements of the street in terms of the context, allowed us to produce objectives, to select a typology of the street, determine the elements of the street, and so on. And that toolbox resulted in a whole series of different boulevard elements that through that process we determined what was important, essential, and necessary. Balancing the competing interests of the street. There are some elements of the street that are subjective, that relate to destination, experience, aesthetic, place, and character, and others that relate to things that are more objective, that we want to include transit, parking, sidewalks, street trees, loading, and cycling. And then begin to see how they collectively go together, what fits and what doesn't, and how that might actually look as it's built. We look at alternatives, so we don't just come to one design, we come to often many designs, and in the case of this project, we had four alternatives that looked at the balance of the street. Bike lanes, in this case, in Lakeshore Road, we had one option that did not include bike lanes, but another that did. What does that look like as a physical design that we can bring to all the stakeholders and show them and demonstrate them? is if they're standing on the street, what it will look like as it's built out. In the case, this is a curbless street, so that the street could be shut down and people could move into the street as special events happened, and the boulevard sidewalks could actually almost move onto the pavement of the road for those days. But then what would the street look like if it had cycling infrastructure? And what would that do to the width of the boulevard? So what trade-offs would happen? What are the place-specific elements of the street when we're designing for the generations to come? In Guelph, they had a design of their central area, which is now being designed for a public square at the early part of the century that looked like this. And then by 1964, it looked like this. So those early historic images play very much into the way we think about redesigning of the area. We think of how we can bring celebration and enjoyment to that place, often through secondary lighting that can give a really distinct sense of when you arrived at this place, what does it look like and what makes it different from somewhere else. What is the material quality and the furnishings of that street that might be contemporary, might be classic, or might be traditional? Those are decisions that get made as we go through the process. Contemporary is not always the objective of the local mid-sized city, particularly when it has a heritage context. And what kinds of elements of history and culture can we bring out in the design of the street that can bring that story alive through various narratives? And how can signage and wayfinding orient people further as they arrive and get from place to place? How is it greened, infiltrating water into the tree pits or into drainage swales? How is it flexible for special events, but how can at certain times allow for cars and normal activity so that the businesses adjacent, in this case on Carden Street outside their Market Square? How can it be balanced when we develop the design of the street and the buildings that front onto the street so that scale and proportion of the street and the built form itself creates containment and a sense of human quality? And the materials that we choose, such as granite, if construction happens, how can they be pulled out, construction done, and put back so that they don't have to be completely redeveloped? And how does the street become a social place for boulevard cafes and people simply enjoying the street life? And then it should be totally inclusive. Thank you.